Rambam, Maimonides. We're in the 14th book, the final book of Judges. We're in the final part of we only have 4 days left until we finish Maimonides' teachings. It's amazing. We are in the laws of kings and wars. Let's get right into it. All right. Okay, place that in. Excellent. Okay, Laws of Kings and Wars, Chapter 1. This text includes 23 mitzvahs, 10 positive and 13 negative commandments. And they are the obligation to appoint a king in Israel, the prohibition against appointing a convert as a king, the prohibition against a king marrying many wives, the prohibition against, remember biblically you can marry more than one wife, right? So you could have many wives. Today you can't because of rabbinic law. But that's a biblical law. Prohibition against a king accumulating many horses. Prohibition against a king amassing too much silver and gold. And the obligation to destroy the 7 nations living in the land of Canaan. Prohibition against allowing any one of them to remain alive in the land of Canaan, the Canaanites. The obligation to destroy the descendants of Amalek, which will be actually tomorrow's Torah portion, by the way. The obligation to remember what Amalek did. The prohibition against forgetting Amalek's evil deeds, including his ambush against the Israelites during their journey from Egypt to Israel. The prohibition against dwelling in Egypt. The obligation to offer peace, which, by the way, Rambam lived in Egypt, by the way. Interesting. Whatever, we have to learn the laws and understand. The obligation to offer peace to the inhabitants of the city when besieging it. To carry out the laws governing the siege, as prescribed in the Torah. In particular, the laws applying if the enemy agrees to surrender, and those applying if it refuses. The prohibition against offering peace to Ammon and Moab, in contrast to the other nations when besieging them. The prohibition against destroying fruit-bearing trees during a siege. The obligation to set... Tu B'Shvat is coming. That's when we finish Rambam, by the way, on Tu B'Shvat. The obligation to set up a latrine outside the army camp, the obligation to carry a spike to dig with, that's so if you need to relieve yourself, the obligation to anoint a priest to speak to the troops in the event of war, the obligation to allow those who have consecrated wives build homes and planted vineyards and to rejoice with their new status for a complete year while releasing them from military conscription. The prohibition against asking those mentioned in the previous category to perform any duties, including handling the needs of one city or providing supplies to the troops during that year, the first year of marriage, or having your new home. The obligation not to become frightened nor to flee in the midst of battle. The prohibition and obligations referred to Yafetz Tayar, a Gentile woman to whom the Torah allows relations in wartime, and that you remember you can marry more than one life, so someone who you potentially could marry. Prohibition against selling the Yafetz Tayar, you can't make her your slave. The prohibition against subjugating her to perform duties after having relations with her. These mitzvahs are explained in the coming chapters. Okay. Number 1, Israel was commanded to fulfill 3 mitzvahs upon entering the promised land: to choose a king, as it says, appoint a king over yourself; to wipe out the descendants of Amalek, which it says, not in this week's parsha, but it'll say like erase the memory of Amalek. Actually, it also says, it's interesting why he takes that verse. To build God's chosen house, as it says, and seek out his presence and go there. The appointment of a king should precede the war against Amalek. This is evident from Samuel's charge to King Saul. God sent me to appoint you as king. Right? Shmuel was the prophet, Samuel. He was the prophet, and God it sent Samuel the prophet to anoint King Saul, Shaul HaMelech, as king. As he said, God sent me to anoint you as king. Now go and smite Amalek. In other words, that's the king's first duty. Right? Today we don't know who Amalek is, but then they did. You know where Amalek lived, by the way, then? Gaza. Oh, no. That's the Plishtim. That's the Philistines. I'm sorry. No, wrong. Amalek lived on the eastern bank. Okay. Amalek should be annihilated before the construction of the Holy Temple. As it says, and it came to pass when the king dwelled in his palace, and God gave him peace from all his enemies who surrendered him. The king said to Nathan, the prophet, "Look, I'm dwelling in the house of cedar, but the ark of God dwells within curtains. Since it is a mitzvah to appoint a king, why was God displeased with the people's request of a king from Samuel?" So God, if you look in the back of the book of Samuel, he was displeased that the people asked for a king. Why? Because he made the request in a spirit of complaint. Rather than seeking to fulfill the mitzvah of appointing a king, they were simply intent on rejecting Prophet Samuel, as implied by God's reply to him, "It is not you, but me that they have rejected." Number 3. As an initial preferred option, the king may be appointed only by the court of 70 elders together with a prophet, as Joshua was appointed by Moshe, the prophet, and his court, and as Saul and David were appointed by Samuel of Ramah and his court. Okay, I have to stop here. Sorry, but zeh hu zeh. All right, folks, thank you for joining.
Thank you, Rabbi.